Hello everyone, I hope you're having a wonderful day today. I've been asked to do a tutorial on how I care for my Cattleya that I grow in New Zealand Sphagnum moss. This has been growing in New Zealand Sphagnum moss ever since I had it, and I've had this plant for 10 years now. It's never lost a leaf. That kind of amazes me. This was one of the very first orchids that I had a lot of success with. So this kind of put a lot of wind beneath my wings. So let me show you how I take care of it and how it grows. The very first leaves, the very first cane that this one had was this one right here in the center. It came in this tiny little 3-inch pot, and that's what I got. And it had 2 blooms on it, and that's all I had. It was the cutest little thing. And so every 2 or 3 years, depending on how much it grows, which it's going to be growing a lot back in this southwest window in my sunroom, but every 2 to 3 years I change out the New Zealand Sphagnum moss, and it has really done well. This is a miniature variety. It's RTH Singing Dawn, and it blooms in the springtime. As a matter of fact, when it blooms, it's it heralds spring for me. So this time of the year, the new canes, this cane right here, and this cane right here, by this time of the year, they have matured. And you can tell if your Cattleya is doing well because your new canes will be taller and stronger than last year's canes. This was last year's cane right here, and do you see how this is bigger than this growth right here? So that's how I know I'm watering it, fertilizing it, and giving it the sunlight that it needs. Is if the plant is getting bigger and stronger. I don't ever divide this plant out. The next time that I repot it, I'm probably going to have to get a clear bucket to put it in and just drill holes in the bottom because this is the largest orchid pot that I can find. This is a 10-inch orchid pot, so this is very large. Also, what I'll show you is at the base of the canes. Do you see that? That is a flower sheath. That's going to grow, and that's going to be the part where that flowers. Okay, at the base of the new canes, you're going to get the root growth. So I've got a lot of new root development here at the end of October. So I do fertilize this. Right now I'm fertilizing it once a week with about 1/2 teaspoon of 2014-13. When it's in active growth, I give it about 1/2 teaspoon of 2014-13 per week. I do supplement it with Epsom salts at a very low rate. I just give it about 1/8 teaspoon of Epsom salts per gallon, about once or twice a month. I water it midweek. And I also use the copper fungicide. I'll give you a close-up of the copper fungicide. Okay, here's a close-up of the copper fungicide that I use. I've used it on this plant for a very long time because, see, it says it covers black spots. Cattleyas tend to get black spots, and that's just the way that it is. So I figured if I could just keep ahead of the black spot that I could keep the foliage pretty for longer. What I'm showing you here is an aerial view of some of the air roots. These, the longest one is about 4 feet long, if you can imagine that. So that's why it has its very own table. Plus it is, I'm keeping it as a specimen plant. Oh, I forgot to tell you, I do use the copper fungicide once a week. It's just a spray. And if it's cloudy, cool, rainy, I skip the copper fungicide until it's a sunny and warm day so that I can keep the foliage dry. I like to spray the copper fungicide on a day when I know it's going to dry out quickly. I clean the leaves probably about once a week because there is a lot of foliage here to clean. So I water it once a week in this New Zealand sphagnum moss. Normally what I do is I give it some water, I'll drain it, and then I'll fertilize it on the weeks that I do fertilize. What I like to do is I like to give it 2 doses of fertilizer, and then 1 week I just water it with plain water. So I keep the salts, from building up. I'll do the Epsom salt, very light Epsom salt supplemental feeding about once a month. So that's how I keep it watered and fertilized. The important thing to keep in mind with Cattleyas is they do like a little bit of dry out time between waterings, and that's the reason why I only water this one once a week. I can tell when the inside of the pot shows very little moisture. You can tell from the bottom here. When the bottom, way down here, doesn't have any moisture in it, you know that it's dry, that the sphagnum moss is dry. You can also just feel the amount of dampness with your finger. If you're growing it in bark, that's a good media to grow in as well, because the roots will have a dry out time in between waterings. But just give it that extra time to dry out between waterings, because that's how they grow the best. I have found that people who grow them in bark sometimes need a little bit of sphagnum moss on the top of that bark to keep the surface roots hydrated, because sometimes the roots inside the pot can be hydrated, and then you have dry roots on the surface. So a little bit of sphagnum moss might help you out as far as growing it in a bark media. And I've mentioned to you this is a miniature variety. Even though it doesn't look very miniature right now, it is a miniature Cattleya. I have seen regular size Cattleyas growing in indoor garden conservatories that were huge. I saw one that was about 5 feet wide, and it was loaded with blooms. It was a most beautiful sight. So Cattleyas are just breathtaking. When they bloom, they're showstoppers. I also wanted to give you a potting tip. I always place these non-dissolvable packing peanuts in the bottom of this pot because I don't want any excess water to be in this dish and perhaps seep back up through the moss. I don't want my moss too wet. That's a big secret of growing a Cattleya in moss. You want to get this excess water away from the plant so that the roots don't sit in water. Also, the canes and the roots grow very quickly on these. So when they're in active growth, that's when I give them the most fertilizer. Then when their growth slows down, I back off on the fertilizer. So let's go over specifics about temperature and fertilizing, because you're going to need to know this to grow your Cattleya well. In my sunroom, my temps in the daytime usually run from 75 to 85 during the growing season. In my house, it was much cooler. It was about 70 to 75. So that's the reason why I can do a half a teaspoon of the 20-14-13. I have a higher temperature out here, and it will break all that nitrogen down. If you're growing in a home environment where it's cooler, the most I would go is a quarter of a teaspoon or a quarter of a regular dose. Every, 2 or 3 times a month, I would say would be sufficient, especially when it's in active growth. When you've got leaves or roots in active growth, that's when you want to use your fertilizer with your Cattleyas. When it's in bloom, you're going to bring that way down because it's just not going to be using that much energy. I still give it a very small dose, but it's in active growth when you have your higher temperatures and more light that you're going to want to use more fertilizer on these. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask. And you all just be highly favored, deeply loved, and greatly blessed. And we'll talk to you all next time.